It's Mayor in the Morning. Here's special guest host, Toronto Mayor John Tory on In-Depth Radio. News Talk 1010.
Good morning. Well, first mistake already. Welcome to Tuesday here on News Talk 1010. And this is really messed up. I may be out of practice at this. I haven't done it in 4 years, but it also messed up my morning routine, quite frankly. And you know, we all have them. You have them. I have them. I normally get up about 4:50. I hear Robert Turner, or in this last week or so, Becky Coles analyzing the news while I'm getting ready. And then I hear John Moore talk about the top 5 stories at 5:50. And then one of two things happens. Either I leave for work at 6, having heard the news, having heard John Moore and Becky Coles or Robert Turner analyze it, or I get back into bed and pull the covers over my head on the theory that whatever it is they've talked about, I just don't want to deal with it. And we're going to talk about one of those stories today that's very, very frustrating, and that is the continuing wave of gun violence taking place in our city. We'll get various different perspectives, and I'll share some of mine with you. And, of course, we're going to talk about John Tavares coming to the Leafs, which is exciting news. I'm not planning the Stanley Cup parade just yet, because we get into that habit of doing that over the years. But it is exciting news, and it's going to be great for the Leafs. And, of course, we will talk about the weather. And one of my great treats today is that I get to introduce Kelsey McEwen, who is back, because I heard you were away for a couple of days. And I gather it's going to be hot, hot, hot on a continuing basis through most of the week. Kelsey, good morning.
Good morning.
And the weather is brought to you by Frank Leo, your home sold guaranteed. Frank Leo of Remax has a multi-million-dollar marketing system to get sold guaranteed, or Frank will buy it. Go to getleo.com and start packing. The 5 things you need to know coming up, and we're going to cover that. It's just 5:46 now, and it is 20 degrees this morning, so it's not bad yet, and it sounds like it's not going to get all that humid today.
Now, things you need to know.
Violent long weekend. Another one, unfortunately, in the city. 11 people shot in Toronto since Friday. We'll be talking about that through the morning. The summer heat continues, as you've just said, and will stick around until Thursday. And Thursday could be pretty brutal, even compared to the weekend. The 400 southbound has reopened after a police officer was dragged by a vehicle. Number 4, betting site Bodog gives the Toronto Maple Leafs the highest odds to win the Stanley Cup this season. Where have we heard that before over a number of years? I'm old enough to know. And number 5, Justin Trudeau finally addresses groping allegations. I should tell you, by the way, that, one of the things that maybe has happened is that my eyes have deteriorated since I used to do this. And Jesse Lorraine, who does a great job producing this show, puts up what they call the tag, which is to give credit to Frank Leo as one of the sponsors of the show. And so I wear glasses only to see distance to drive at night. Don't wear them to read or at pretty well any other time. So I'm having to take my glasses on and put them off and take them off and put them on, and it just generally is. So if you hear me stumbling around, it's just because I'm out of practice on doing this, but it's also just because I'm taking glasses on and off to read various things that are there. After we take a short break, we will talk about the crime over the weekend. I'll spend some time on this morning. We'll talk about it, of course, on the round tables, but I'm going to give you a few of my own thoughts, because there are people out there peddling to you the notion that, there's an easy answer to this, or that all the responsibility rests in one place. It's a very complicated, very troubling issue. Nothing gives you more trouble if you're the mayor of Toronto than this issue, which just speaks to the question of safety in our city. So we'll talk about that. It's 5:50. It's 20 degrees. It's Tuesday morning. John Tory here sitting in for John Moore. We'll be back in just a moment. 5:55 and a half, 20 degrees. It's going to be a reasonably nice day. Warm, not as humid as it was over the weekend, but getting very, very humid again on Thursday. Who made the numbers so small on these computer monitors that you can't read? If you hear me stumbling over the time, it's not because I can't read numbers. It's because they're so small that even my eyes, which are pretty good for reading, aren't very good. Let's talk about the crime issue for just a moment. We'll talk about it through the morning. The one thing I can say to you, and I know you know that I'm not going to be, other than straight with you, there is those who pretend there's an easy answer to this. They are misleading you. They are misleading you. There is no easy answer. It involves a very complicated network of gangs in the city. And again, nobody will come forward and say this. I will tell you that the statistics we are given as members of the police board, and I believe they're even public on the police website, indicate that the vast majority, more than 75% of the shootings that take place in Toronto are in some way gang-related. And so if you want to look at the essence of the problem, especially these particularly disturbing incidents that are happening apparently random on the streets, I mean, think about it for a moment. I mean, the one on Queen Street, and I'm, by the way, when I talk about this, I am not talking about the victims. I'm talking about the people pulling the trigger. Who were the people that pulled the trigger on Queen Street? Were they the Boy Scouts? I mean, who goes by in a car and fires a gun out the window at people on the sidewalk, regardless of who the people are that are on the sidewalk? There's no evidence anybody on the sidewalk in any of the shootings that those people were themselves doing anything wrong at that moment. Somebody came by and shot them. And so it is a problem, and it's not, I can't even explain it simply because there is no simple explanation. And people will say, and I'm getting quite a few texts this morning saying we need action. And we do, and there is action that is being taken. For example, there are 170 new police officers being hired as we speak. In fact, 20 of them are on the streets, graduated already. Another class is starting very shortly. And that is probably because by attrition, by retirement, the number of police officers started to diminish. And it is all hands on deck. And I'm delighted at the fact that the new Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, has indicated a keen interest. And it wasn't just after he got elected or even during the campaign. He was talking about it before. And I'm looking forward to find ways in which we can work with him. The fact is, some of the grants that help to address some of the safety-related issues in communities were reduced over the last number of years, and I hope we can discuss some ways in which we can work together to help. And the same is true of the federal minister, Ralph Goodale, who I can tell you wants to try to do the right thing on gun control, which is a big part of this. It is still far too easy for people to buy multiple guns in our city, in our country, right here, perfectly lawfully, and then never really have to account again for where those guns are or whose hands they might have fallen into. I will tell you very candidly, ladies and gentlemen, who or what doesn't help. What does not help is the politicization of this issue by the Police Association president, who pretends whether it's me or whether it's the police chief or the premier, somebody's got a magic wand to deal with this. Nobody has a magic wand. If it was that evident as to exactly what needed to be done, then I guess somebody would have done it by now, because any of us, the police chief, myself, the premier, we just want to make sure these needless deaths and threats to our safety in Toronto come to an end. And his answer that you hear him say all the time is just hire more police officers. Well, the fact is there were more police officers, say, in 2005 when we had the year of the gun. It is not the answer. It is one of the answers, which is why we're hiring 170 and 200 police officers, and with continuous hiring to come as we go forward. So we'll have much more to say about this. I want to play you a bit of a debate we had at City Council last week about my very strongly held view, and I had a debate with Councillor Gord Perks about the fact that people who are charged these days, right now, with gun offenses, should not be given bail if they had a previous conviction on that. I mean, they're just laughing at us as they get out in the streets and then do their mayhem all over again. So we'll talk about that through the morning, and we're going to talk to Deb Hutton coming up after 6:17 about that, and also about one of Donald Trump's parties for July 4th and whether I should go. There's one being held here in Toronto, and you may have a view on that. It's 6 o'clock. It's 6:06, and it's 20 degrees here in the city of Toronto. It's going to be another warm one today. Let's get the details on that from CTV's Kelsey McEwen.
Hey,
I should tell you, and we're going to talk a lot about the sort of policing crime issue this morning, just because it's so much in the news, and it is such a very troubling situation facing our city. Troubling for me as the mayor, but it's troubling for everybody who lives here. And again, I take a lot of heat when I say that the city remains a safe city, but the fact is I'm only going by the facts. And the facts are that this is still the safest big city in North America, taken over time and taken, you have to take it over time. You can't take it any given week. And it is one of the safest big cities in the world. But we're really challenged this year by various circumstances. And one of the things I'm getting a lot of texts about this morning, and you're welcome to send a text in anytime you want at 71010, is to bring back carding. And carding, the fact of the matter is that carding, I want you to think about this, those who are advocating that so readily. When I've heard talk on this radio station, on News Talk 1010, about the notion, for example, of our police being given the authority to just randomly pull people over for a test when it comes to drinking and driving. A lot of people object to that on the basis that they're not doing anything obviously wrong. Other than the randomness, the police have no reason they can state for pulling somebody over, and people consider that to be a violation of their right to go about their business peaceably. What was banned was simply that, was the notion that you can't just arbitrarily stop people, given their charter rights and so on the street, who are doing nothing wrong, who are not the subject of investigation. They're just stopped to ask questions. And it doesn't even stop you from stopping them. It simply says when you do stop them, you have to advise them of their rights, which we all have under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to say, I don't wish to speak to you. It's an American example, but you all know on the TV shows, what's the first thing they say when they arrest you and read you your rights, as they say, which is you have the right to remain silent. And so I totally support the fact we have to give the police as many tools as we can give them to gather intelligence, but the notion that people just say that carding being brought back would represent the solution to these problems and stop the shooting is just not so, and it's not that simple again in the context of the law as we know it. It's 6:12, and it's 20 degrees. We're going to check in with Deb Hutton on these stories, the weather, the violence, Stephen Harper and what he's up to in Washington, the Leafs, and I'm going to ask her about a party that the U.S. government is having here in Toronto on Thursday, and whether I should go or not, because some people say you shouldn't go to these things. It really just sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It looks like you're endorsing the comments that President Trump is making about us nice Canadians. So we'll do all that when we come back here on News 1010, 20 degrees, 6:12, of John Tory sitting in for John Moore. And that music tells us it's time for the morning brief, and today we're joined by Deb Hutton, who's a former senior advisor to Premiers Harris and Eves, and still a part-time communications consultant. And I expect someone who's called upon for her advice even today, Deb. You don't have to admit or deny that. How are you doing?
I'm great, John. How are you?
It's nice to talk to you. I'm fine, thank you. So I guess the number one question a lot of people were talking about over the course of this weekend was really the weather, and what did you do to keep cool over the weekend? Because it was brutally hot. We can't complain, but it was brutally hot.
Well, I have to admit, John, we have a swimming pool.
Oh.
So we spent the entire weekend, our kids are 10 and 4, as you know, the entire weekend outside by the pool. And so I really can't complain.
Does it amaze you how many friends that you realize you have or that you didn't know you had when you have a swimming pool?
Well, yes, it normally would, but we're down at our farm in Niagara. And as you well know, we are out sort of in a secluded area. So it was just family this weekend.
Deb, I got to tell you something. It doesn't matter how secluded it is. If people know you have a pool and it's hot like that, they'll find their way to your place, especially if they know you have beer on ice.
Well, that's true. We did have family.
So on to more serious matters. I mean, we do have a problem in the city of Toronto and in the GTA, for that matter. I mean, if you look at some of the stories even this morning about shootings in Brampton and elsewhere, but it's certainly we've been seeing it in the city of Toronto. And I was talking earlier on about the fact there isn't an easy answer, but what are your thoughts on, is there something that occurs to you as somebody who knows these issues, who watches these issues, that would be the one thing that we could be doing, that might help to stem this tide that's happening over the course of this summer?
Well, John, you've been talking about your eyesight and all of us getting a bit older. And every time I say what I'm about to say, I feel like I'm about 90. But I believe it. We have got to look at the notion of 3 strikes and you're out in this country. We are having too many situations where people are out on bail, people are out on parole, and it's time to say if you're a repeat offender, particularly for these violent crimes, and without a doubt when it's gang violence, we have to toughen up from the top. It's not about just police on our streets. It's not about just prevention. We actually have to lock these people up and keep them in jail.
I was talking about this last week at City Council and simply asked for the authority of the City Council, which I got, but not before a debate, to simply say if someone is arrested on a gun charge and they were already out on bail or they previously had a conviction on a gun charge, those people, and again, it's a decision of a judge to give them bail, but the Crown Attorney should be strenuously taking the position these people should not get bail, because the police tell me that these people are back on the street sometimes hours later just thumbing their nose at the police and at the system. So it really goes along with what you're saying.
I think so, but I think we're not just talking about putting the onus on our judicial system. We actually have to change the laws in this country to make it tougher for crowns to argue for defense attorneys to argue against what the crowns are putting forward.
Well, and that's one of those things where we're going to have to work on this. I'm going to give you a little bit of a tip of something I want to ask you about after we come back from a short break, and that is this. The U.S. government, as you know, the Consul General, who's a wonderful man, we've been lucky to have him, although I will tell you he's a Buffalo Sabres fan. That's not so good. But he's been the Consul General here, and he's going home soon. But he's having the annual party they have here in Toronto, and you may have seen that a bunch of people in Ottawa said they would not go to the July 4th party put on by the U.S. ambassador in Ottawa, including the mayor of Ottawa. And I was inclined actually to go to the party, because if I'm not there, then I can't go and politely go and tell people that I don't appreciate how they're treating Canada and Canadians, especially the comments of their president. You do it in a way that's not insulting them. But I want to get your advice, Deb Hutton, when we come back, as to whether I should go to that party and say my piece politely, or whether I should not go to the party, because that sends a more effective message. So we will come back and talk to Deb Hutton about that, and about former Prime Minister Harper's visit to the White House when we return here on News Talk 1010 at 6:21, 19 degrees in the city of Toronto. We're going to, of course, check on traffic, and we're going to talk about a number of things, but we are going to get back into the police issue.